Chapter 1. The First Night. I moved into the new house on January 5th, 2024. The house was charming, an old Victorian style with intricate woodwork and tall windows that let in streams of light during the day. However, as the night fell, the house seemed to change. The shadows grew longer and the air felt heavier. I brushed off the unease, attributing it to first night jitters in an unfamiliar place. As I was settling into bed, I heard a noise. It was a faint creaking, almost rhythmic, coming from the hallway. I told myself it was just the house settling, but the sound persisted. I got up to investigate, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was dimly lit by a single nightlight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a shadowy figure moved at the end of the hallway. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure was tall and indistinct, almost blending into the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. My rational mind tried to convince me it was a trick of the light, but a deep-seated fear had taken hold. I hurried back to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. My heart was racing, and my mind was filled with questions. Who was that? Was it real, or was I imagining things? I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening intently for any more sounds. The house was silent, but the fear remained, gnawing at my nerves. The rest of the night was a blur of restless tossing and turning. Sleep came in fits, interrupted by every creak and groan of the old house. By morning, I was exhausted, my mind foggy with fear and doubt. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something in this house was watching me. Daily life in the new house started to feel like walking on eggshells. It began with small, inexplicable events. I would leave a room and return to find objects moved from their original places. Books would be taken off shelves, kitchen utensils rearranged, and doors left ajar that I was sure I had closed. At first, I blamed my forgetfulness, but the frequency and strangeness of these occurrences grew. Cold spots appeared in random rooms, chilling me to the bone despite the heating being on. The living room, which was warm and inviting during the day, turned icy and unwelcoming by night. I avoided spending time there after sunset, the cold making my skin prickle with goosebumps. The house seemed to have a life of its own, with an atmosphere that shifted unpredictably. The feeling of being watched became constant, whether I was cooking in the kitchen, reading in the study, or even brushing my teeth in the bathroom. I could feel eyes on me. It was an oppressive sensation, like someone breathing down my neck. Turning around, of course, revealed nothing, yet the feeling persisted, an invisible presence lurking just out of sight. My nerves were fraying. Sleep eluded me as my mind raced with fears and uncertainties. The slightest noise jolted me awake, heart pounding in my chest. I began to dread the nights, knowing they would bring more unsettling experiences. My once cozy home had transformed into a place of anxiety and unease. As days turned into weeks, the tension grew unbearable. I was on edge, jumping at every sound and shadow. The house's eerie atmosphere weighed heavily on me, a constant reminder that I was not alone. The unseen presence was making itself known, and my fear was slowly turning into a desperate need to understand what was happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on someone else's space, someone who didn't want me there. I couldn't ignore the unsettling events any longer. Desperation drove me to the local library, where I began to dig into the history of my house. What I found only deepened my unease. The house had a dark past, with a string of previous owners who had met tragic ends. Accidents, illnesses, and mysterious disappearances plagued its history. Each story seemed more chilling than the last. Among the dusty records, I discovered old photographs and documents. There were images of the house from decades ago, looking eerily similar to its current state. Faces stared back at me from black and white photos, solemn, unsmiling faces that seemed to hold secrets. One photograph, in particular, caught my eye. It showed a family standing in front of the house, their expressions grave. The date scribbled on the back was January 5th, 1924, exactly 100 years before I moved in. I brought the documents home, spreading them out on the dining table. As I examined them, a chilling realization dawned on me. The family in the photograph was among those who had met untimely deaths. According to the records, they had perished in a fire that consumed the house in 1924. My mind raced with questions. Had they ever left? The more I delved into the history, the more I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me. The house was a vessel for these restless spirits, and I was merely the latest occupant in a long line of unfortunate souls. My fear turned into a desperate need for answers. Who were these people? Why were they still here? And most importantly, what did they want from me? As the days passed, my research consumed me. I spent hours poring over old newspapers and records, piecing together the tragic history of my home. The faces in the photographs haunted my dreams, their eyes following me wherever I went. The more I learned, the more I felt their presence in the house. It was as if they were reaching out to me, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. My life was unraveling. The house, once a symbol of new beginnings, had become a prison of fear and uncertainty. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was living among the dead, their sorrow and anger seeping into my every waking moment. I needed to find a way to communicate with them, to understand their pain, and hopefully bring some peace to their tormented souls. The encounters with the spirits became more frequent and intense. No longer were they content with subtle hints and quiet disturbances. Ghostly apparitions started to manifest, their ethereal forms drifting through the house at all hours. It began with fleeting glimpses, a face in the window, a figure in the hallway. But soon, they lingered longer, their presence undeniable and terrifying. Doors would slam shut with such force that the walls shook. Lights flickered ominously, plunging rooms into darkness before snapping back to life. The cold spots grew colder, now accompanied by a palpable sense of dread. Sleep disturbances turned into vivid nightmares, where the spirits seemed to invade my dreams, showing me fragments of their tragic pasts. Their appearances became more distinct. Pale faces, hollow eyes, and tattered clothing, all bearing the marks of their untimely deaths. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Panic surged through me as I realized I couldn't move. My eyes darted around the room, and there, at the foot of my bed, stood a woman. Her dress was old-fashioned, singed at the edges, her face twisted in sorrow. She stared at me with such intensity that I felt her anguish deep in my bones. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The pressure lifted suddenly, and the woman vanished, leaving me gasping for breath and drenched in sweat. The fear and exhaustion took a toll on my mind and body. Every corner of the house held a new terror, every shadow a potential specter. I avoided certain rooms altogether, particularly the living room, and the master bedroom, where the spirits seemed to gather most frequently. Despite my efforts to stay out of their way, they followed me, their presence a constant reminder that I was never alone. I couldn't help but wonder if the spirits were trying to communicate something important. Their appearances grew more detailed, their actions more deliberate. I found myself drawn to the basement, a place I had avoided since moving in. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and the creaking stairs groaned under my weight. I descended into the darkness, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the far corner of the basement, I discovered an old trunk covered in dust and cobwebs. With trembling hands, I opened it to reveal a collection of personal items, letters, photographs, and keepsakes from the previous owners. Among them was a diary, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. I started to read, hoping to find answers to the haunting. The entries spoke of joy, love, and ultimately, despair. The final entry was dated January 5th, 1924, describing the night of the fire in haunting detail. The discovery of the diary pushed me to seek help. I couldn't handle this alone anymore. My first step was to contact spiritual advisors and mediums. Most of them were skeptical, dismissing my experiences as overactive imagination or stress. A few agreed to visit the house, but their efforts yielded little relief. The spirits seemed to mock their attempts, growing more active and aggressive after each failed exorcism. Friends and family, whom I had hoped would provide support, were equally disbelieving. They listened politely, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Some suggested I see a therapist, while others offered platitudes about getting more sleep or taking a vacation. Their lack of belief only deepened my sense of isolation. I was alone in this battle, facing an unseen enemy that no one else could acknowledge. One night, in a moment of desperation, I decided to try a seance. I gathered candles, set up a circle in the living room, and attempted to reach out to the spirits directly. The air grew thick and oppressive as I chanted, my voice trembling with fear. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the room grew cold, and a whisper filled the air. It was faint, almost indiscernible, but I could make out words. Help us. Find peace. The whisper sent chills down my spine, but it also gave me a glimmer of hope. The spirits weren't just tormenting me. They were trapped, seeking release from their suffering. I knew I had to find a way to help them, but every attempt seemed to push them further into anger and despair. The house's atmosphere grew darker, the spirits' presence more menacing. I turned to research again, looking for any clue that could aid in freeing the spirits. I found stories of similar hauntings where restless souls had been guided to peace through understanding and acknowledgement. I reached out to experts in the field, hoping for guidance. Their advice varied, but the common thread was the need to communicate with the spirits, to understand their pain and help them move on. Despite the fear that gripped me, I decided to try one more time. I gathered the diary and the personal items I had found in the basement, hoping they would provide a connection. As I sat in the living room, surrounded by remnants of the past, I spoke to the spirits. I told them I understood their pain, that I wanted to help them find peace. The room grew cold, and the lights flickered, but this time, there was no anger in their presence, just sorrow, deep and overwhelming. My heart ached for them, these souls trapped in a cycle of torment. I knew their pain was real. their suffering endless. I promised to continue searching for a way to help them, to free them from the chains that bound them to this place. As the night wore on, the oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a way to end this haunting, to bring peace to both the spirits and myself. The spirits began to target me personally, their actions growing more deliberate and intense. Whispers echoed through the house, calling my name in soft, mournful tones. At first, I tried to ignore them, but the voices followed me everywhere, becoming impossible to drown out. They invaded my thoughts, their sadness seeping into my mind and heart. My emotional state deteriorated rapidly. The constant presence of the spirits left me feeling drained and vulnerable. Every reflection seemed to show fleeting glimpses of their faces, their hollow eyes staring back at me. I could no longer trust my senses, and my anxiety grew with each passing day. The house felt like a prison, its walls closing in on me, the air heavy with sorrow. The spirits began to show me visions of their past lives. I would be walking through the house when suddenly I was transported back in time. I saw the family living their daily lives, moments of happiness tainted by the knowledge of their impending doom. The visions were vivid and heartbreaking, their emotional weight almost unbearable. I felt their pain as if it were my own, their despair echoing in my soul. Nightmares plagued my sleep, filled with images of the fire that had taken their lives. I could hear their screams, smell the acrid smoke, and feel the heat of the flames. Waking up brought no relief, as the terror of the dreams lingered in my mind. My once safe haven had become a place of torment, and I was desperate to escape the grip of the past. The decision to leave the house weighed heavily on me. I knew that fleeing would not free me from the spirit's torment, but staying seemed unbearable. I felt a profound sense of guilt at the thought of abandoning them. They needed my help to find peace, yet my own sanity was slipping away. Torn between my fear and my desire to help, I struggled to find the strength to stay and face the spirit's wrath. A violent encounter with one of the spirits marked a turning point in my ordeal. One evening, as I was walking down the hallway, a powerful force shoved me against the wall. The impact knocked the breath out of me, and I slid to the floor, stunned. I looked up to see a malevolent figure standing over me, its eyes burning with anger. The room grew colder, and I could feel its rage permeating the air. This confrontation left me shaken and more determined than ever to seek refuge outside the house. I spent a few nights in a nearby hotel, hoping to escape the haunting. However, the spirit's presence followed me. The whispers continued, and I could feel their cold touch even outside the house. It was clear that running away was not an option. The spirits were bound to me as much as they were to the house. Returning home, I realized I had reached my breaking point. The weight of the spirit's sorrow and anger was crushing me. I needed to find a way to bring peace to the house and to myself. I decided to delve deeper into the history of the previous owners, hoping to uncover a way to help them move on. The diary and personal items I had found in the basement became my guide. The haunting experiences intensified as I dug further into the past. The spirits seemed to know I was getting closer to the truth, their appearances becoming more frequent and more disturbing. I witnessed the tragic events leading to their deaths, each vision more heart-wrenching than the last. The fire that had claimed their lives replayed over and over in my mind. Their final moments etched into my memory. Desperation drove me to the brink. I could no longer distinguish between reality and the visions. My days were filled with research, and my nights with haunting dreams. The spirits' pain had become my own, their despair a constant companion. I knew that I needed to find a way to end this torment, both for them and for myself. The answer lay somewhere in the past, waiting to be uncovered. Gathering my courage for one final attempt to cleanse the house, I prepared a ritual. I gathered the diary, photographs, and personal items from the basement, arranging them in a circle in the living room. Candles flickered around me, casting eerie shadows on the walls. My heart pounded in my chest as I began to speak, calling out to the spirits with a mix of fear and determination. The atmosphere grew heavy, the temperature dropping sharply. The spirits began to manifest, their forms more distinct and terrifying than ever. Faces twisted in anguish, their eyes pleading for release. I could feel their pain, their desperation to be free from this endless cycle of torment. I chanted words of peace and release, hoping to guide them toward the light, but their anger seemed to grow. As I continued the ritual, the house shook violently. Objects flew off shelves, and the walls seemed to groan in protest. The spirit's presence was overwhelming, their sorrow and anger filling the room. My voice trembled, but I pushed forward, determined to help them find peace. The intensity of their emotions threatened to consume me, but I held on, focusing on their need for release. The confrontation reached its peak when a figure stepped forward from the group. It was the woman from my earlier encounter, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. She extended a hand toward me, and I could feel the weight of her grief. I took a deep breath and reached out, our fingers barely touching. A surge of cold energy passed between us, and I could see flashes of her life, her family's love, and their tragic end. In that moment, I understood that the spirits didn't need an exorcism. They needed acknowledgement and understanding. They needed someone to remember their lives, to honor their memories. I spoke to them, recounting what I had learned about their past, sharing their joys and sorrows. As I spoke, the room seemed to lighten, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. The spirits began to fade, their forms becoming less distinct. The woman smiled faintly, a tear rolling down her cheek. I could feel their gratitude, their acceptance of peace. The room grew warmer, and the candles burned steadily. I knew that I had done what I could, that I had helped them move on. The house fell silent, the presence of the spirits dissipating. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm. Despite the momentary calm, I knew the spirit's departure had come at a cost. The house, though no longer haunted, felt empty and cold. The memories of what had transpired lingered in every corner, the walls bearing silent witness to the torment and release. My own emotional state was fragile, the weight of the experiences heavy on my heart. The house that once promised a fresh start had become a symbol of sorrow and loss. The decision to leave was not easy. I walked through each room, memories flooding back with every step. The living room, where I had faced the spirits, the hallway, where I had seen the first shadowy figure, the basement where I discovered the trunk of memories. All these places held a piece of the tragic story. The spirits might have found peace, but their presence had left an indelible mark on my soul. As I packed my belongings, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The fear, the despair, the moments of hope and ultimate release. It all seemed like a surreal nightmare. I knew that leaving was the right choice, yet a part of me felt guilty for abandoning the place that had become a part of my story. I hoped that by leaving, I could find some semblance of normalcy and start to heal. On the last day, as I stood at the front door with my bags, I took one final look at the house. It stood silent and still, a beautiful facade hiding the sorrow within. I whispered a farewell, hoping that the spirits had truly found peace and that their memories would live on in the quiet corners of the house. With a heavy heart, I closed the door behind me, stepping into a future uncertain but free from the haunting presence. Driving away, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The road stretched out before me, offering a new beginning, yet the past clung to me like a shadow. The haunting had ended, but the experience had changed me forever. The fear and anguish would fade with time, but the connection to those lost souls would remain, a reminder of the fragile line between the living and the dead. The house in the rearview mirror grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. I focused on the road ahead, determined to find peace and rebuild my life. The scars of the haunting would heal, and I would carry the memories with me, honoring the spirits by remembering their story. The sadness of their end was intertwined with a hope for a new beginning for both them and myself.